So I largely agree with everything they've said, and I'm going to be a little bit controversial.
Oh, great.
Because I think there is sometimes a point where we have to revert to the point at which you don't get an option. Because sometimes people don't understand the impact, and you can try and explain it, and they may not get it, or they may not care, and you may just have to be the bad guy in that scenario and go, well, I know that this is going to cause a problem, so you just have to do it this way. And you just have to fight that fight sometimes because you know it's for everyone's safety. And that's essentially what it is. Sometimes you just have to take a hard line.
Help, right? So how should businesses, and you guys, focusing on the security side of it, be helping businesses balance opportunity against risk? Do you want to tackle that, Phil, while you got the mic? Ed, sorry?
Yeah, sure. So I was going to do the classic security. It depends, which is basically security language for get out of jail free. Do not pass go, but do collect £200. In a nutshell, a large part of that comes down to kind of helping the business understand the potential pitfalls of doing something. Ultimately, business is all about risk, whether it's financial risk, commercial risk, opportunity risk, security risk, whatever it happens to be. And you have to take risk to be successful. You do. You have to evolve and sometimes spread bet and sometimes make the wrong decision and get it, wrong from whichever angle. Go into markets that you thought this is going to be hugely nightmare. I suppose my role is really, from that perspective, trying to be a partner and trying to just be not necessarily kind of the conscience on the shoulder, but just to kind of say there is no right or wrong answer in this scenario, and ultimately it's your decision, and I'm here to support you, help you do it in the most risk-aware way, not the least risky way, but the most risk-aware way, so that you can take decisions and be aware of some of the consequences, some of which we literally have no idea what that consequence might be, or the likelihood of that risk occurring, because we just don't know. But we'll help you understand that and be with you along the whole journey.
So that's great. The help you understand it. We're deep techies here, right? We talk Klingon, right? Manoa, how are you helping your businesses understand that balance of risk and opportunity? How are you doing that without scaring them, but without being, too unsecure?
Yeah, so I think just to build on a couple of the points there, I think it's the language, the engagement, the purposeful impact, right? So at the simplest level, my role is there to set guardrails, right? If we simplify it down to a basic level of understanding, certainly for most of the audience that I work with, C-levels, even, one down to, if you keep things simple, we talk about outcomes, we've talked about it here in terms of purposeful impact in means and ways and language that people can relate to. We talked about here, what is it that we're here to do? So I'm here not to prescribe to you what you can and cannot do. Not at all. I'm here to say, look, we've got a set of guidelines, we've got a set of recommendations that we can make together. Let's have a collegiate, collaborative, engaging, supportive conversation in means and ways that everybody understands, where you're starting, where you want to end up, whether you are a CFO or an audit committee member through to a technical analyst on the ground who's delivering an outcome. So if you position it in the simplest, most monosyllabic terms, in language that is linked to the business, the purpose, the outcome, that makes it easier for them to understand and I think relate to. If it's easier to understand and relate to, they'll understand what you're doing. The point Ed made earlier, it's generally a dark art, right? What we do, right? It's about demystifying, and I did a paper on it a few years ago about actually the biggest challenge that we have as CISOs, as security professionals, isn't about talking about tactics and weapons and warfare and cybercrime units. Yeah, that stuff is interesting some of the time, right? Depending on the conversation you're having. But it's about just demystifying stuff that generally people don't understand, are a bit scared of, and hence it's the people in the basement who have to look after it. So if we come up to the people who are actually in the common room, in the open areas, who are actually having connected conversations, who are part of that discussion from the outset, it makes it easier to deliver the outcome.
That's great. So Ed's telling us that, we're partnering. You're saying we're coming out of the dark room. We're talking to people. One might say we've become approachable in the security world, right? But Phil, what happens when people don't necessarily buy into that and they don't approach us and they do something? right? And then we got to recover. How do you deal with that in that circumstance without coming down with a big heavy fist of iron, without making them feel like, well, I'm not going to bloody tell them when I want to do something else again? How do you combat that and retain that good partner status?
Yeah, I think it's a mistake, I think, to always think it's a choice between being secure or sort of seizing the opportunity, right? I think a well-designed set of security controls can actually help capture the opportunity. So, you know, mistakes will happen, right? Classic examples around, I don't know, insiders, sort of privilege access, and whether through malice or through accident, you know, someone's got access to a production system and they actually accidentally turn something off or delete some data because they think they're in the development environment. You know, I think there's a lot of really good reasons why it's helping the business to put controls in place so that you don't let people have privileged access and they can't make mistakes and they don't have accidents. And you could say, oh, that's slowing us down. But actually, it's an enabler of the business because you're preventing them from causing real disruption to the business. And if you do it in an intelligent way, it shouldn't get in their way. So I think the whole premise of it's a choice between being secure or not, it's not always the right question. Sometimes it will be, but I think if you design your controls correctly, you can actually help the business rather than just be a sort of department that has to approve things and kind of get in the way.
Right. So what I heard there was some safety nets for when the partnering bit up front doesn't work and they're not proactive about it. So I like that. Now, Kerry, I know that you've got, we're kind of talking about a bit of zero trust in our organisations there, right? Which is quite a negative connotation. I know you've got some thoughts on this, Kerry. Why don't you tell us how you approach zero trust, maybe you don't call it that, and how we put those kind of controls in that Phil's talking about?
So I largely agree with everything they've said, and I'm going to be a little bit controversial.
Oh, great.
Because I think there is sometimes a point where we have to revert to the point at which you don't get an option, because sometimes people don't understand the impact, and you can try and explain it and they may not get it or they may not care, and you may just have to be the bad guy in that scenario and go, well, I know that this is going to cause a problem, so you just have to do it this way. And you just have to fight that fight sometimes because you know it's for everyone's safety. And that's essentially what it is. Sometimes you just have to take a hard line.
Cool. You other guys, you, how are you getting on with your zero trust policies? How's that all going?
Zero trust is a massively overloaded term. What
Unpick it for us then, Phil.
Well, so it's most commonly used in describing like a modern sort of network and sort of identity and access kind of architecture that I think is less about sort of, I guess, the conflict with the business and more around kind of how you design your enterprise to, in a modern way, so you're not dependent on data centers, etc. It's almost like the standard. If you were building a business now, it would always be zero trust because you don't have this sort of corporate data center and corporate network. I think there is another sort of softer human side of zero trust, as in we don't trust our people and we kind of lock them down and don't allow them to do things. So I'm a big advocate of the first one. And then for the second one, I think it really depends on, you know, it's understanding what people's jobs are. It's what Manuel and Ed have been saying. It's kind of, you know, if I'm a software engineer, my job is to kind of ship software and I need to be able to, you know, use Homebrew on my laptop to install, you know, versions of software. Yes, there's some security risks around that, but actually trying to keep pace with, you know, the amount of stuff that they need to kind of have access to, it may be that we should allow them to have that on their laptop and kind of put controls in other ways.
And I think that is a good point. I think, you know, you talked about some awareness there. We talked about awareness being a bit wider now. Sounds like awareness training for different camps of people, the people who have got perhaps a little bit more access than some other people. And if you've got all the right controls in place, can they not see it? Is there not like competition? I've got more access than you. How do you play that out, Manoa?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question, but I think before I answer it, if I just go back to, you know, when I started working in security and I was at JP Morgan, and this is like 20 years ago, and we were rolling out, this is pre-cyber days, this was just information security on the crest of, you know, SOX and WorldCom debacle, right? So at a time where the industry was going through massive cataclysm of change, we had developers who had unfettered access to everything, right? And they had that because we trusted them, right? And we still do, by and large, right? I think in terms of discharging our responsibilities, we have a level of trust in our engineers and our teams to do the right thing, right? Because they're generally conscientious, they understand, they've got good smarts about them, right? So you give them a level of trust, right, to be able to do their jobs. Plus, depending on what environment you're in, you give them enough trust to allow them to do the job and do it safely and securely. But that changed overnight, right? It changed overnight because the regulation said, no, we can't give unfettered access. The SEC, the Fed, just were not having it, right? So you had to enable them to do what they needed to do in a supportive, collaborative way. So that was about layering in tools. That was about putting in more logging and monitoring. But you did that in ways that introduced initially a bit of friction, right? They got a little bit agitated because nobody wants to slow shit down, right? They actually want to go faster and harder for longer. Yeah. So once you've done that and you've taken them through that journey, and what you deliver to them is a message that says, look, we don't want to stop you doing what you're doing. We just want you to do it differently, right? That's the message, the positioning that really does make a difference. But then it goes back to, okay, once you've done that and they see the value of that, you're actually there to deliver them an outcome that allows them to do what they need to do in a safe, secure, trusted, protected way. Because we've just been talking about it. Actually, the chance and incidence of misoperations and misconfiguration is probably attributing to 80 or 90% of the loss events that most organizations will see, whether that's an overshare of an S3 bucket, an incorrect configuration file being pushed out, or all of the above, right? It's not your nation state attacker who's coming in left field that you're never going to see, right? So it's actually the accidental, the malicious insider who maybe just got things wrong, overshared something, and acted in means and ways that it shouldn't have done. Yeah, so there's kind of like a lot of balance there. Right?
Yeah, there is. There's definitely a change in the way it's approached and thought of, right? Which I think needs all of the things we're talking about in terms of partnering, being more approachable and stuff like that. There still is change there, right? And for the uninitiated, security is still tricky, and people can feel like they're being locked down and stuff. So there's a real balance to strike there. I think I quite liked what you were saying at the start, Ed, about partnering with people, understanding you are going to piss them off sometimes. You ask anybody to change anything, they're going to be annoyed with you. You just got to keep talking them through the benefits and why that is, and hopefully they'll get it, right?
Can I ask
Yeah, sure.
So with that in mind, do we actually think that zero trust is actually achievable? Because I feel like there's some conflation in terms of what that actually really means. So how do we ever get there if we can't even really define it?
Yeah, and I think, sorry, do you want to?
No, go first.
So I think it is really very organizational, contextual, based on interpretation, right? So I think if I look at most of the organizations that I've worked with in the last 15 years, big brands, there's probably some elements of zero trust, right? It's a mindset that's probably prevailed over the last 5-6 years because the change that we've all been navigating, right? In terms of remote workforce, no perimeter, more and more, cloud-based connectivity solutions, more agility, right? But we've been talking about actually what does that mean, right? That means simply for me, going to the board, going to the regulator and saying, look, actually the stuff that I care about, which is around privilege ID and access management, I can clearly define and protect what is the nebulous perimeter. And when we do have an event, I can hand on heart say, actually, we did what we needed to do to be able to identify it, detect it, respond to it. And when it does go bad, and it will go bad, i.e. you'll have a loss event or a compromise or an availability issue, perhaps less than availability because there's so much redundancy and resiliency built into the systems that are largely, cloud native, that you'll have a good line of communication, a robust negotiation with your regulator or your authority to say, actually, this is what happened and this is what we did about it, right? So I think there's lots of cross areas there, that we can talk through from a technology, people and process that attribute to it, but by all means, Ed.
But just for the record, you're making me feel very calm here, Manohar, right? I'm not used to that from a CISO, right? I'm feeling like, okay, they've got this handled. This is great. So to Kerry's question there, what do you think about that?
I'm sadly old enough to remember the Jericho Forum and deperimeterization and locus of controls, which is what zero trust now is. I mean, even the title of zero trust is just something that it's like nails on a blackboard for me. If you say zero trust, it just feels the wrong message. Is it ever achievable? Probably if you're someone like the NCSC that literally starts from scratch with a complete greenfield site and some of the best brains on the planet that are focused on security right from the outset. Everyone else, no. somewhere towards maybe 5% trust. Who knows? We're generally retrofitting things to an existing organisation with, I'm not going to say legacy, it's production. With an existing kind of mantra and culture, ways of working, technological output, people, everything about the organisation is existing. So we're trying to retrofit in there. So for me, it's about kind of finding the balance within there, which is, if anyone gets there, can you tell me? Because yeah, I always end up toppling one way or the other, and it's always an uncomfortable feeling. That's not just from a security angle, that's from many angles. It's trying to find the way to allow the business to operate and flourish, and trying to, where you can, get slightly proactive in some of the aspects that you want to improve. So yeah, we all know that no one should be admin apart from those who really need admin. Reality is you've got more admins than you need, and most of them have got internet access. Deal with it, them's the breaks. Someone like Ian Levy will say pack up and go home. No, that's reality. That's reality. So what do we do? How do we compensate? Where do we actually focus our efforts? Because, I think, Kerry, you said about, there's some battles you've got to fight. Boy, you've got to pick your battles. Because you could fight every single one of them and be there and literally achieve nothing. Most of our job is about conceding on risk. Conceding from, here's theory, here's reality. We ideally want to get close to theory, but just a step forward from reality is better.
I'm hoping
Better and still
Phil's
better.
trying to break in to disagree with you.
Yeah, so I've worked in huge enterprises, 250 years old banks with a lot of legacy, and I agree, you're always just trying to compensate. But I've also worked in startups where, there is none of that legacy. You're not in production yet. You've got a couple of hundred employees. You're all in the cloud. And I think it's actually, from a security perspective, so much easier because you're practically in a green field. And, you're still going to have some challenges around admin access and internet access, etc. But the challenges are so much simpler because you can put the target architecture, as it were, in place. And I think that is a genuine sort of competitive advantage that some smaller organisations have compared to big enterprises, where you don't need a huge team to get actually a sort of more, a security posture that can compete with the bigger enterprises just because you haven't got the legacy.
Okay, cool. We're going to move on, Phil, if that's okay, unless you've got one quick point.
I was only going to say, totally agree with that. And a good portion of my job is actually not about security. It's actually about telling people, if we did our build standards that way, or if we deployed that way, or actually if we had kind of common patterns or Ansible playbooks or libraries in that work this way, actually it makes your life easier. Oh, by the way, it makes mine easier as well. But it actually makes your life easier that these 4 people who are all doing things differently, if we bring commonality in there and take away your overheads, boy, that makes your life easier, doesn't it? Yeah, we'll help you do that. So we end up doing a lot of work that's actually IT, but actually will kind of help someone else, enable them to be more effective, and at the same time get a security outcome as well.
Got it. That's